Hey guys, welcome back to the Fantasy Labs podcast. This is Bryan. I am recorded on Thursday night, and I am going to go over the Friday slate, which is Friday the 13th slate. And I'm going to go through each game of the slate. We have another 11-game slate, so pretty big, but I'm going to try to go through as quickly as I can. I'm on my own tonight. It is Justin Fan's birthday today, so if you see him, wish him belated a happy birthday, if you see him around Twitter, rather. And Jay is working on some projection stuff, so it is on me to knock out this podcast, and I'll do my best. It is weird to talk to yourself for 45 minutes straight. If you've never tried it, do it. Just sit in front of a mirror and talk to yourself, and I'm sure you will find it interesting. But yeah, so I'm going to try to go through, and hopefully you can tolerate me for 45 minutes. So we'll go through the slate. So starting off, the first game is the Timberwolves at the Pacers. And the over-under right now is 198. I checked about 2 hours ago, these lines. So they could have moved a little bit, but I think they're probably pretty accurate. So over-under is 198, so pretty low, under that 200 threshold that you're kind of looking for. The spread is Pacers -7. So it puts implied points. The Wolves are pretty low at 95.5, and the Pacers are at 102.5. So the kind of the big news on this game that you're going to have to watch out for is the injury situation. Ricky Rubio was the scratch tonight, which I guess I should mention that the Wolves are on a back-to-back, and it is a road back-to-back. So obviously they're going to Indy and playing tomorrow night. So already you probably want to downgrade the Wolves. Probably not a whole lot. In back-to-backs, I sometimes get worried about the older guys or guys who are coming off injury. But, guys who are young, Wiggins is super young. Anthony Towns is super young. So these guys I'm not particularly worried about back-to-backs just because they're young, they're spry, they can get up for another game 2 nights. I mean, that's nothing. They did that in AAU ball just a year or two ago. So I'm not super worried about that. But I would monitor the injury situations. Ricky Rubio was a scratch. Zach LaVine got the start. He hasn't been amazing tonight. He's a guy who turns the ball over a lot, so not an amazing cash game play, even though he's going to be cheap. He is let me see his price. He was pretty cheap tonight. Yeah, so he was 35 tonight, and he's up at 39 tomorrow. So still definitely really palatable if Rubio's not going to go. So keep watch of that, but probably that I'm going to go probably just GPP only, because I think there is a guy at point guard and even lower than his price point that is better in cash games, which we'll get to when we get to that game. But as far as the Timberwolves side, I think Towns is getting up there. He's at 75, but he's probably still pretty fair. He is just a guy who's going to get a lot of stats in a lot of different ways. He's had 40 fantasy point games on DraftKings in the last 3. I'm not sure where he's at right now because they're playing while I'm doing this, but he's definitely interesting. And probably at 75, if his floor is going to be around 30 fantasy points and he's going to be up around 40 in good matchups, then 75 is probably too cheap. Wiggins is fine, especially if Rubio's out. Obviously, LaVine would be the guy who got a lot of the point guard minutes, but you would expect that Wiggins would be kind of their go-to guy in the offense, and he would be the guy who would facilitate things and get a bump in usage. So I think that he's interesting. He's at 64, which is probably pretty fair. I think he's probably too volatile for me to go cash, but I'm fine with him in GPPs for sure. Kevin Martin, I guess you could think is interesting. You think that he's going to get a bump with Rubio out, but he's even more expensive. He's $700 more than LaVine, and I just don't really think Kevin Martin's that great anymore. I know that's probably not a great take. People would obviously disagree, but I think that I would rather, if I am going to get some exposure there, I'd rather just go down and take the risk on LaVine. On the Indy side, Paul George, I think, is a lock cash game play. His salary's up. He's at 92 on DraftKings, but just a guy that has an incredibly safe floor. He has been at over 40 fantasy points the last 2, and before that he was over even 50 and even 60 in the games before that. So he's a guy that's not going to bust, especially in a matchup like this where he's getting Minnesota. There's no guys that can defend him. They're young. Wiggins is intriguing, but I would put my money on the veteran and Paul to be able to get the better of that matchup, especially on the offensive end, even though Wiggins does have a lot of potential on the defensive end, but not a super spot for him, especially on the back-to-back, to be able to keep up with Paul George. And Paul George has actually got a little bit of size on him as well. So I think that he's definitely probably the safest cash game play at the top if you're kind of looking at top small forwards. Obviously, Durant's out, which makes that more interesting. LeBron's the most expensive guy at 9.9, but Paul at 9.2 I think is probably the safest play. I don't super love any of these other kind of mid-tier guys for Indy. George Hill and Monte Ellis, they've been just kind of disappointing, probably a little overpriced for me. I guess you could look at Jordan Hill. So Miles Turner is out for tomorrow. So if you want to kind of maybe find some sneaky value, you could look at some of the Pacers bigs. Probably the bump is going to be at Jordan Hill. He's at 47, which is probably fair. I don't think there's a whole lot of upside there, just because I think the Wolves are actually pretty good defenders down in the post. Cat is actually pretty good already, even though he's just started his NBA career. And Jordan Hill's not that good. So I guess you could say that Jordan Hill, maybe Mahinmi or Lavoy Allen would get a bump, but I'm not really intrigued by any of those guys, so not super interested. Moving on to the next game is the Jazz at the Magic. There's no line on this because the Jazz are playing now, and they've actually had some injuries. So I'm guessing the odds makers kind of wanted to wait and see how things shook out tonight. The big news, obviously, tonight is Gobert was out of the lineup. So that definitely changes things up a lot. And you're definitely going to want to monitor that for tomorrow, because I think that if Gobert is out, Derek Favors is probably the best power forward play of the night. Again, he's another guy that I'm not super worried about back-to-back. He's still pretty young. He's, 23? And so he's a guy that, sometimes I worry about back-to-backs later in the year, and when the guys are, kind of in their 27 up. And guys, they definitely want to save for the playoffs. But the Utah Jazz don't have a history of the playoffs, so they definitely kind of want to go and make sure they win all their games and be in contention. And Favors is young. And so I'm not too worried about that. If Gobert's out, he has a super high ceiling and really high floor. He's going to take most of the usage on offense, and he's also going to be their primary rim protector on defense. Last time I checked, I haven't actually been able to keep up with this game because I've been doing this, but last time I checked, Favors had 7 blocks. So you can kind of see the defensive upside of him. So obviously that is definitely intriguing. And at 71, he is definitely a guy that I would like to target in really all formats. Gordon Hayward is probably underpriced if Gobert doesn't play, because he would see some of that usage bump. He's a guy has been a little underperforming this year. I think he's actually been pretty good in real life, but not as good as maybe we saw last year at times at fantasy. So I think 63 is not a price I'm interested in unless Gobert is out, and then I'm a little interested, not in cash, but in GPPs. Alec Burks and Rodney Hood are probably okay. Alec Burks, I think, actually is a pretty good play. He's been scoring the ball really well. He is a little worrisome in that he's so dependent on scoring, but so it probably takes me off of him in cash, but in tournaments, fine with that. Rodney Hood actually hasn't looked that good. I think he's a good player, but just his shot hasn't fallen. He hasn't looked good tonight in the limited minutes that I've seen him. And same with Trevor Booker. He didn't get the start. They actually started Trey Lyles tonight, but Trevor Booker's been kind of getting minutes, but got in foul trouble, ended up with a dud, fouled out of the game, and just a really disappointing game. And that's kind of what you're getting out of Trevor Booker. He's really low price. He's at 31, so you could take the risk on him. I probably will tomorrow too. I'll admit it. I probably will roll with some Booker because he's at 31 and in an intriguing matchup against the Magic, who aren't super great at defending the low post, and a guy that he could, get some rebounds. So definitely not a guy in cash because he could put up a dud like he did tonight, but a guy who is possibly intriguing in tournaments who really doesn't need much to pay off his value. On the Orlando side, obviously monitor Nikola Vucevic's situation. He is coming back from injury and kind of getting limited minutes. He had a game winner the other night, but he came off the bench and didn't play his full allotment of minutes. I'm not sure exactly where he's going to be at, so definitely keep monitoring that situation. And then the biggest one for me is whether Oladipo plays. He left the game on Wednesday with a concussion and ended up only playing, I believe, 6 or 7 minutes. And the guy that actually came in and got his allotment of minutes is a guy who you would think that it would be a shooting guard, maybe Fournier moved down, but they actually played Shabazz Napier, who they acquired this offseason. It played him 30 minutes, even though both him and Alfred Payton are both point guards, but Napier has a really good shot, and so they decided to roll with him alongside Alfred as kind of an off-guard guy who could spot up around the perimeter, and actually played really well, hit a bunch of threes, and he's only at 3K, so I think that if Oladipo is out with that concussion, that Napier is probably the best option among these low price point guards, and probably the best option if we're kind of just looking for pump plays down at 3K. So if Oladipo is out, then I think that he's definitely fine in really all contest formats. So definitely a guy I am intrigued by a lot. So let's move on to the next game, which I have as the Hawks at the Celtics. I do have a line on this one. It's at 205.5. The Hawks are a 1.5 favorite right now. Hawks are implied at 103.5, and the Celtics are at 102. So a pretty close game. Let me pull up the salaries. So the top price guys are Millsap and Horford, and I think that they're potentially intriguing in this matchup. I think that Boston is they don't have like a ton of great defenders, but they're a team that is just solidly coached, and Brad Stevens is just a great coach in general, and so I don't think that guys just really go off on them as much as you would think, starting Jared Solinger and some of these other guys. But I think that these top guys for Atlanta are definitely in play. Millsap is one of those guys that I talk about where it's not a guy that I like look at in models or look at on the slate and I'm like, oh, I got to have some Millsap in my lineup. But then you look at his game logs, and he had 48.5, 45 and a quarter. He had 48 before that, 44. Just a guy who's just right there every time. He's not going to explode for 60 points, but he's also not going to dud for 25. So he's a guy that's going to get you right around 40 fantasy points every night. And if you're playing cash games, that sounds pretty good. So I'm primarily a tournament player, so I probably don't appreciate Millsap as much as you guys who play cash are. And I admit that, but if you are a cash game player, then he's definitely intriguing, probably one of your favorite options. Horford went off. He had been kind of a little disappointed before that. He had 48 fantasy points last night, but he didn't do it in a ton of minutes, so that was a little fluky to me. So at 72, he's probably, I wouldn't say he's overpriced, but he's probably fairly priced and not a guy that I'm like absolutely trying to get into my lineups for sure. Teague is fine. I think at 7K, he's okay. I don't think he's a must play because let's see where Rondo is, who we're going to get to. Yeah, Rondo's only 7.6. So only $600 more for a guy who's in a much better matchup and is going to get a lot more minutes and usage. So Teague's okay, but not my favorite play. And those are kind of really it for me. I don't really like any of the lower end Atlanta guys, especially in a big slate like this. On the Boston side, obviously the most intriguing guy to me is going to be Evan Turner, kind of depending on how injuries sort themselves out tomorrow. But he got the start last game, played 33 minutes and had 33 and a quarter fantasy points, had 20-point real-life points and 3 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal. And that's pretty just kind of quintessential Evan Turner. He's going to not be that great in real life, but he's going to just kind of fill it up from everywhere. So I think he has a pretty safe floor, actually. I don't love saying that about Evan Turner, but he does. He's going to fill up the box score in his minutes, and the question is just whether he's going to get those minutes. So I would definitely monitor that. But if he's going to get 30 plus in a game where I'm not super worried about Jeff Teague or Korver or any of those guys as defenders, I think they're solid, but no guys I'm really scared off. So if he's going to get that many minutes, then I am definitely on him. Jared Solinger is a guy that I could potentially be talked into. He's been really solid. I always like Justin and I have talked about like having some trouble endorsing guys depending on their just how good they are in real life. So I'm I don't know. I was on Solinger a lot. I'm now wondering how good he is in real life, but his fantasy production has been solid. He's took over the starting role and put up 30 fantasy points last game against Indy, and had 11 points, 11 rebounds, doubled. And so if he's going to get that many minutes at 5,600, he's definitely fair. He's a little too volatile for me to play in cash, but in tournaments, I think that he could probably outproduce his salary pretty easily. So I'm fine with that. Next game is the Cavs and the Knicks. Over-under's 201. Cavs are 6-point favorites. Puts over on implied points on Cavs at 103.5 and Knicks at 97.5. And at the top, we obviously have the stud small fours and LeBron and Carmelo. I think LeBron's always a good play. I don't super find myself just locking in LeBron in slates, and it's not really because of LeBron. It's just I sometimes get worried about his minute allotment, and I think it's just in general I don't super love paying up for small forward anyway. But in tournaments, I think you have to, just because of his potential to explode and have a ridiculous triple-double or something. Melo is interesting. He's been up over 40 fantasy points. 83 is probably fair, but you're paying for his upside, and there's definitely upside in this matchup. Kevin Love is still underpriced, I believe. He is 79, and he had 42 fantasy points and 56 in the last one, playing a ton of minutes. He's getting 40 minutes a game, and they're really relying on him, and he has a really good matchup against New York. They're probably not as good as you would think from last year. They brought in Rolo, who's really good around the rim, and Porzingis actually has a lot of upside as defender. I think he can take – I think Love, who is a really savvy offensive player, can take advantage of Porzingis with some pump fakes and stuff. But, Porzingis could give him a little trouble just with his length, and Porzingis is like 7'6". I mean, he's not 7'6", but he's really tall. So I think that that could be potentially a risk, but I think Kevin Love is a really, really good offensive player and is in a really good spot here. So at 7-9, I definitely like that a ton. On the Cleveland side, I'm not super on really any of these other guys. So I'm not going to waste my time talking about them. On New York side, Melo is intriguing again. Porzingis is actually I really like him at 59. I think he's underpriced. He had a dud 2 games ago where he only had 15.5 fantasy points, and he's still not getting a ton of minutes. He was up at 33 actually last game against the Hornets, but I'm not 100% sure whether that is indicative of where he's going to be. I don't really trust their coaching staff. I think that he probably should get there that many minutes. He probably should be at 30 minutes. I think he's been impressive in his rookie campaign. But again, we talked about before that he just has such a safe floor because of how many rebounds he's grabbing down. So even though he had that dud 2 games ago where he only had 15.5 fantasy points, last game he had 15 rebounds, had 33 fantasy points. The game before that, he had 10 rebounds. He had 13 rebounds before that. He had other games where he had 14. Yep. So he's a guy that's just super safe in rebounding, and that's a stat that you can count on. So I think that he's safe in cash, and at 59, it's not only reasonable, but I think probably underpriced. So I'm definitely okay with him for sure. The other guy is I don't love Afflalo here at 44. He played 28 minutes and had 21 fantasy points. He's at 44, so he's kind of an intriguing price, but I'm still just not really sure how all that's going to shake out as far as minutes go in the backcourt. So especially an 11-game slate, I'm probably going to stay away from that situation. So that's about it for that game. Let's move on to the next one, which is the Pelicans and Raptors. And I am blind on this game. I have no line. Presumably, they're waiting for Anthony Davis to make an announcement. Last I checked, he was doubtful, which just kind of makes everything difficult as far as not only this game that we're talking about right now, but the slate in general. Obviously, when one of the best fantasy assets go down, kind of changes everything up. But so he's doubtful. So, but I would definitely keep track of that. If he isn't able to go, obviously, I think that I don't super love a Sheik or a Jinsa. There's not a whole lot of upside there. I think Ryan Anderson showed that he has some upside, but he's not safe enough for cash for me, even with the uptick in minutes with Davis out. But he definitely is an intriguing tournament play because he is really dependent on scoring. So if he's on that night, then there you go. As far as the rest of the Pelicans, I think Eric Gordon is an elite play, kind of with or without Anthony Davis, but especially without. He's at 62, and his usage is really high without Davis. He's been kind of the focal point of their offense when Davis has been out, and actually been productive in that role. A lot of guys are not productive when they're kind of given more usage, and Gordon actually has been pretty good in that role, and he's at 62, which is probably under where he should be with an increased usage. And I think that it's even fair, even with Davis. He's kind of their go-to guy other than him in the offense, and I think that 62 is definitely reasonable. And if he's out, then it's not only reasonable, but definitely a guy who's probably one of my favorite, probably a guy that I would look heavy at shooting guard in cash games for sure. Ish Smith was the play last game. He was the revelation who just destroyed it at his low salary. But Drew Holiday is back because it's not a back-to-back, so they're going to split minutes, and there's really no value to be had there. So I would move on. Toronto is a team that you definitely wanted to monitor. For sure. I don't love Lowry, even though his opponent rank says 30th, so it's intriguing, but largely that is because of Drew Holiday being out. But now that Drew Holiday is back, Drew Holiday is actually a really good defender. It's not that I hate the matchup. I think Lowry 8-1 is intriguing as a tournament play, but I'm not dying to get him in my lineup. DeRozan's too inconsistent for me. Not super interested. JV is a guy that I'm interested in, especially if AD is out. I'm always worried about his minutes. He got 23 minutes last game against Philly, which is ridiculous. Dwayne Casey's a moron. So I definitely don't trust him enough in cash. But for some reason, if Casey decides to give him 35 minutes like he should, then all of a sudden JV's going to explode. I don't know if I would bet on that, which is why I would never go in the cash, but in tournaments for sure. So the question for Toronto before we move on is going to be who plays. DeMar Carroll was out last game. He's questionable for tomorrow. Terrence Ross is out. So if both of those guys are out, James Johnson is obviously going to be the play. He's at 37. He disappointed last game in that same spot. And that's just because it's James Johnson. You're going to have good nights and bad nights, and probably more bad nights than good ones. But I don't love him. But at 37, a guy who's probably going to get 30 minutes if those guys are out, you could do worse as a pump play. So I wouldn't just go crazy in your exposure to him because he's not an amazing player. So I don't go crazy with exposure on guys who just don't have the talent, even with the depressed price. But definitely an intriguing play if you're trying to get in some of the high guys like Westbrook, who's at 11 something ridiculous. But definitely monitor the news on that one. So let's move on, keep on going. Hornets Bulls 199.5. Bulls are 7-point favorites. Implied points, it's Hornets at 96.25 and the Bulls at 103.25. Revenge game for the Bulls, who have been good this year, except for that last game against the Hornets when they led up 130 points and got destroyed. So I'm not 100% sure what to make of this game. Because I think that the Bulls could come out and be mad. Jimmy Butler's already said that he was mad at Bryan Roberts for taking a shot in garbage time for whatever reason. So I think that he could come out heated. But in general, I'm not not just really on any of these players that much. I don't think that anyone's super overpriced, but I don't really know, especially for the Bulls. I don't really know how they're minutes are going to pan out. Gasol has been over 40 fantasy points the last two, and he's been intriguing because Charlotte's a good team defense, or at least they have been. They've been a little bit down this year, but they're pretty solid with Clifford at the helm. He's a really good defensive coach, but more so just kind of individual one-on-one defense. They don't really have a guy who can handle Gasol, so he's semi-intriguing a little bit. But there's just no guy that I'm like super in love with here, really on either side. I'm trying to look at the bottom barrel. There's nothing. McDermott got 28 minutes last game, but didn't do much. I mean, he had 20 fantasy points, but you're looking for more than that in a tournament. He just doesn't have the safety. Yeah, I'm not really super on any of these guys, to be honest. Mirotic is up at 63. And he got 28 minutes too. Put up almost 40 fantasy points, but his minutes before that were super low. Yeah, so it's just not a situation where you can really trust any of these guys. I think on the Charlotte side, this is a tough matchup for them. I think that Chicago's going to defend them well, so I'm not really intrigued by any of these guys. Al Jefferson was intriguing a couple games ago, but it's just been really down since then, so it just hasn't looked good lately. Marvin Williams was a nice sneaky play, but he's kind of came back to earth. Jeremy Lin had an amazing game last game. He had 30 fantasy points in 21 minutes and looked really, really good just in kind of real life, but that's points chasey to me. So yeah, I know this is lame that I just went through that whole game and didn't give you anything that you could use, but in an 11-game slate, look different games. That game's not where you want to focus on in fantasy. Next game is the Blazers-Grizzlies for me on my sheet. 196.5. Grizzlies are 7-point favorites. Implied points is 94.75 for the Blazers, and implied points for the Grizzlies is 101.75. On the Portland side, I'm not super intrigued by these guys. They're on a back-to-back, which is a little worrisome for me. Damian Lillard's overpriced for me. He is listed as probable, so he's probably going to play. The really only situation that I would potentially take advantage of is their big man situation. Myers Leonard is out, so you could possibly get Ed Davis is a sneaky play. I think he's fine, but again, like it's not really that sneaky because they're going against Memphis. You know, like you're going against Marc Gasol and Ed Davis, I think, is good enough to take advantage of that situation. I think that he can play with those guys, but I don't think he's a guy that's really going to just crush value. So not a guy I'm really looking at too hard. And Memphis is good defense, has good defense in their backcourt as well. I would assume that McCollum would probably get the Tony Allen treatment, and Conley would be on Lillard, and so Lillard could potentially take advantage of that. But at 8-9 and dealing with a thumb injury, I'm not going to search him out in my lineups at all. The guys for me on the other side for Memphis are actually pretty intriguing, especially Zebo. So Brandon Wright has been ruled out for the foreseeable future. I don't even think they have a date on when he'll be back, but he's out. So I think that Zebo will probably get an uptick in minutes, and that will rely on him even more heavily in the offense, especially going down. I don't think he's going to get all of Wright's minutes for obviously, but I think that he's going to get a bump in usage and a slight bump in minutes. And against a Portland team that's really not good on defense, Mason Plumlee, we've talked about on this podcast, has been okay. He's probably a better fantasy defender, as in he can accumulate stats, but he's not really that great in real life. But I think this is a prime situation for Zebo, especially at 6,200, to really take advantage of this matchup. So I think that he has a lot of safety in the matchup too. So I think he's finding cash games at 62. It's cheap. And I also think that he has a lot of upside in tournament as well. So he's probably one of my favorite power forward plays of the night. So I would definitely target him for sure. And then a guy I have to mention is JaMychal Green, of course. And I've kind of done it in jest, but actually I'm kind of recommending him as a real play. He's going to get the minutes for Brandon Wright. As I just said a second ago, he's not going to get all the minutes because they're probably just going to bump up Gasol and Zebo a little bit. to kind of make up for that. But I don't anticipate this game is going to be super close, so they may not have to do that as much as potentially we thought. And JaMychal Green's probably going to get the other bump in minutes and potentially a big bump if the game gets out of hand, which it could, especially if Lillard's not at full strength. So JaMychal Green could be king of garbage time, but actually pretty solid in non-garbage time as well. So definitely interested in him as a sneaky tournament play. So let's move on. Next game is 76ers Thunder, and it is at 208 last time I checked. Thunder are huge favorites. They're at 13.5, and that actually moved up from 13. And I checked it again, it was 13.5, and it may even move up even more than that, which is interesting that they're huge favorites and is moving in their direction with Kevin Durant out. But Russell Westbrook's still good. 76ers are at 97.25 implied points, and Thunder at 110.75, which is the highest of the slate. So obviously there's blowout factor that you probably want to be concerned with, which is fair, but I think that Russell Westbrook is still fairly safe and a guy that you obviously want to have exposure to in tournaments. I think interestingly enough, and this is fairly anecdotal, but I think an interesting point, especially as we saw Westbrook play last year without Durant, is that Westbrook last year, he had that couple-week run where he just kind of continually killed value and exceeded his fantasy production. They kept on raising his price, small increments, and he kept on destroying it. And then it kind of got to a point where they just wouldn't raise his price that much anymore. I know on FanDuel he got up to 13K or even a little bit more than that. But there's just a limit that these sites are going to put it at. I'm not sure if it's even built into their algorithm. And a lot of it is because they want to be user friendly. And so they don't want to have casual players come in and not be able to roster Russell Westbrook if they're his favorite, if he is their favorite player, just because he's ridiculous. So even if his salary, maybe his in production says that he should be at 15K, and they're probably just not going to put Russell Westbrook at that level, because that is not fun for people. And so I think sometimes we miss that fantasy is fun. And so I think that even at 11.6, you kind of look at that and he's by far the most expensive guy in the slate. But I wouldn't be scared off of that because it probably is actually a little too low, as ridiculous as that may sound. But 11.6 with no KD against Philly, Russ is fine. I'm fine in cash and I'm fine in tournaments. Blowout factor, whatever, I'm fine with it. So I think that Ibaka is intriguing because you could potentially get that bump from KD. He's probably the next guy to get the bump, and he's been really solid lately. Just been had pretty safe floor, so I think that he's fine. And then the guy that you have to look at, even though I hate this, is Dion Waiters. He has had 230 fantasy point performances in the last two, despite kind of lower minutes, and probably going to get a little bump in that because of Kevin Durant's injury. So Dion Waiters, even though I don't love him, he is the king of garbage time. And against Philly, they're going to have a lot of it. So I think that he's a guy that you probably have to throw in a tournament lineup or two. Philly, I don't really love any of these guys, to be honest. They've provided some value. Okafor was a monster the other day, but Nerlens is supposed to be back, which they kind of cannibalize each other, especially in uses. So I think they're probably a smidge overpriced, both of them, when they're both playing together. Obviously, you want to target the other one if one's out. Nerlens is always a tournament play, so I don't play him because he could just rack up a ton of peripheral stats and have a 50-point fantasy performance. But I'm not going to lean too heavy on these guys, especially against good defenders like Ibaka. McConnell is kind of in the same place. He's been solid in a 55, still probably a little low for him with what he's been doing in the offense, but against Russ and those guys, I'm just not really super intrigued by that. Stauskas has come back to earth lately, so again, just not really super interested on the Philly side of this, and they're at low implied points, so I think that's fine. So we got 3 more games left to keep on moving. Lakers and Mavs is the next game. Over-under is 208.5. Mavs are 8-point favorites. It puts implied points for Lakers at 100.25 and Mavs at 108.25. And so I think for the Lakers, Um, let me pull up salaries here. The Lakers. So Julius Randle is their highest guy at 63. And I think that that's probably fair. I am a smidge intrigued by him as a tournament play. I think he's definitely not consistent enough to warrant cash games consideration, but he's definitely intriguing enough in the tournament setting against a Dallas team that's not bad on defense, but isn't the stoutest for sure. And really on the Lakers side, that's kind of it for me. I anecdotally really liked what I saw out of D'Angelo Russell, and they finally played him, some minutes, and they gave him 31 last game, and he put up 30 fantasy points. I think he's going to be a stud in the NBA, but I just don't really trust Byron Scott. I think he's the worst coach in the NBA, just awful. He has no clue what he's doing. And so I don't really trust him with any of these rotations other than Randall. So not super on any of the LA guys. Dallas, I think there's a lot of value. Dirk actually had a really good game. I'm not sure how heavy they would lean on him in this situation. He had played 33 minutes, had 50 fantasy points, which is awesome. But I don't think they're going to need him in this game against a bad LA team. Darren Williams is intriguing. He's at 58. He has duds. He was at 14 fantasy points just 2 games ago, but tasty matchup against LA, who just cannot defend at all, especially on the perimeter. So he's intriguing. He's not a guy I'm like building my lineups around, but if I end up with him in the tournament, then I'm fine with it. Then the guy that I am going to target in a ton of my lineups is Wesley Matthews, who is a ridiculous 45. So we've talked about like how quickly a site like DraftKings can catch up to pricing of a guy. And I think we kind of see the example of Matthews this season. So he was coming back from his injury, his Achilles injury. And, we thought that he might take a while. And of course that happens. Achilles injuries are tough to come back from. And he's an older guy. And we saw the struggles. Before that he was that, 14 or 15 fantasy points a game. But we got rumblings that he would see an increase in not only usage, but minutes as well. And so that happened last game. He had 33 minutes against a pretty good Clippers team and had 40 fantasy points. And that's just not something that these sites' algorithms can account for. So anytime you get word that something like that's going to happen, you obviously have to look at the guy. And his salary went up a little bit. I mean, it went up from 42 to 45, but it's just not something that can really bump up that much in one game because they don't know that he's going to get more minutes. But if you believe that he is, and I do believe that he is as well, then at 45 is just ridiculously cheap. He was $3K, more than that last year, in probably a lesser role. So I think that he's definitely if he's going to get 30 minutes, a must play at that spot. But that's kind of it for Dallas for me. 2 more games, Rockets and Nuggets. No over under. Rockets are 5.5 point favorites. Rockets are weird because they kind of crapped the bed the other night against the Nets. This is a team that considers themselves actually championship contenders and lost to a Nets team that I think is the worst in the NBA. So, what are you going to do? But a lot of other guys that we're interested in still killed it from the fantasy perspective, so you can't really complain in that regard. James Harden is expensive. He's at 10-1, but I think he's fine. He's James Harden. He has a really safe floor and a super high ceiling. He had 74 fantasy points a couple games ago, and that's a guy, he could do it. Denver is not a good defensive team. They played a really fast pace, especially at home. So, you're going to see a lot of possessions from this game. And so Harden's great. Dwight Howard's probably one of the best plays of the entire slate, not only just at center, but the entire slate. So I would definitely keep track of, where his minute's going to be. Make sure that you don't see any news that it's going to drop. But he's just been a beast lately. I mean, he's had 2 50-point fantasy performances in a row. Was up at 37 minutes against the Net the other night. He had 20 20 real points and 17 rebounds and 5 blocks. So just monster games. and he's going against a Denver team, and their starting front court is Kenneth Faried and J.J. Hickson. So I don't hope I don't have to explain to you that that is not a good situation for Denver, and Howard should destroy them. And at 74, he's probably a full 2K underpriced, which is ridiculous. So he's probably going to be in the majority of my lineups, and I really like him. The other interesting note of this game was I missed the Marcus Thornton play completely. I'll admit it when I'm wrong, and I was wrong on this one. I thought with Terrence Jones coming back and getting an increased role, that Marcus Thornton's his usage was going to go down and that he just wasn't going to get the same run. But I was wrong. He still played a ton. He played 35 minutes even despite Terrence Jones coming back and tore it up. He had 21 real points, 3 rebounds, 7 assists, a block, and 4 steals, total 47 fantasy points. He just destroyed it. So I don't know what to think of this. I wish I could give you better advice as far as that was a fluke or that was real. Honestly, I don't know. So I know that's boring and not really helpful for you, but if gun to my head, I would say that it was fluky, and I don't think that he's going to have that same role going forward. So I'm personally going to fade him more than play him, but I don't feel like a strong conviction either way. I kind of want to see what that rotation is going to look like before I kind of make definitive claims, but I don't know. I probably have some exposure in case, but I'm probably going to fade more than I play. On the Denver side, I think Gallo is interesting. He's 61. It just looked really good. He's been a little up and down from a fantasy perspective, but real life he's looked really good. He played 38 minutes and had 38 fantasy points, so point per minute, which is solid. Denver is pretty solid defensively when they hit their ceiling, but they have some cracks, as you saw against the Nets. So I'm not like super targeting him in cash games, and part of that is because they're inconsistency. But I think in tournaments he is probably a safe bet to hit value at 61 and possibly exceed it. So I think that's interesting. Moutier is always kind of a tournament play. He's been solid. He's been over 30. He's at 34 fantasy points or higher in the last 3 games. But with kind of how much value there is on this big slate, and even a guy like Shabazz Napier down at 3K is not a guy that I really am going to reach for to get in my lineups. And that's kind of it for me on the Denver side. I guess you could go Faried, who has played well. He put up 40 fantasy points since 65. Hickson is still cheap, is at 45. It's probably going to get the start again, but really inconsistent. And their tournament plays only, and even then, not guys that I'm like super loving tournaments. But you could go that route if you want to. Last game is Nets and Kings. Over-unders 205.5. Kings are 6.5 point favorites. Under. Implied points for the Nets are 99.5. The Kings are at 106. And let's pull up salaries. Let's start on the Brooklyn side. And I don't really love any of these guys, to be honest. I'm trying to find a guy I can throw out to you and say I love this. But I don't. I'm sorry. Yeah. Bogdanovich killed it last game. He had 34 minutes. He took 20 shots. Holy crap. He took 20 shots and had 38 fantasy points. But if Bogdanovich is taking 20 shots on your team and is the highest fantasy scorer, then you know you're a bad team. So I don't trust any of these guys. Lopez is probably the most consistent fantasy guy. And Asali, he's put up 40 in 3 of his last 4, but don't love the matchup here against Boogie, who we saw drew some fouls on Andre Drummond last game. And if you can do that against Drummond, who is one of the quickest centers in the league, he can definitely do it against Lopez, who's one of the slowest centers in the league. So don't love that matchup for him. Sacramento, though, I really love this spot. I think Boogie is definitely a good play. He's at 9.9, which is expensive. He's definitely the most expensive center on the slate, but he's a lot less than Westbrook if you're kind of just looking at total players. And at 9.9, I think it's definitely fair. He's actually pretty. This is kind of scary. So Boogie's a guy who can obviously rack up the stat sheet as far as points and rebounds. You know, he had 33 points the other night. He's always a pretty good bet to get a double double. And he's also a guy who is can actually get a lot of the peripheral defensive stats. He can get steals. He's really fast for his size. So he can get steals and blocks and kind of rack up that way. But apparently he's decided that he is Steph Curry and that he's going to shoot 3-pointers. He went 4 or 5 from beyond the arc last game. So he had 4 3-pointers, which is just ridiculous. So if he's going to do that, then he just has a super high ceiling. He already has a high floor, but he's a high ceiling just because, he can just do everything. He can put up, stats in every single category. And that's a guy you want in a tournament, because if you have a night where, he aligns just for a lot of everything, then all of a sudden you have, 65, 70 fantasy point performance that is going to take you to the top of a GPP, which is what you're looking for. And the last guy I'll talk about tonight, which I think is kind of a must play, is Rondo. He was the first guy that got 48 minutes. He played the whole game 2 games ago, and then they decided to do it again and played him all 48 minutes on Wednesday against the Pistons, and he just exploded. He played 48 minutes, had 14 points, 11 rebounds, 15 assists, 3 steals. Obviously had that huge triple-double, which is extra points on DraftKings. Even hit a 3, which doesn't happen for Rondo very often, but say what you want of Rondo as far as how good he is in real life, but if a guy is going to play 48 minutes and kind of have his potential as a passer and rebounder and just a stat collector in general, at 76, I think he's a must-play in all formats, a guy that I'm going to have in the majority of my lineups, and I think that if you don't have exposure to him tomorrow, you're probably going to lose a lot of money. So definitely focus on him. 76 is just super cheap. Darren Collison is out, so he has all the minutes, all the usage, all the shot creation, everything that he wants in that offense, and he's going against a really bad Brooklyn team with Jarrett Jack as their point guard. So this is just kind of the prime spot where you just don't get cute here. Play Rajon Rondo if you want to win in cash and tournaments as well. So, those are my thoughts. Those are the 11 games. Thanks for sticking through if you made it all the way through this video. I know it's tough to listen to one guy. I agree. It was tough to listen to myself for this long, but thanks for sticking around, and let me know what your thoughts are about the slate. If I missed a guy, maybe I didn't do it intentionally. Maybe it's because I didn't like him, but maybe it was just because I missed him. So shoot me a question on Twitter or whatever, and I'll do my best to answer them before tomorrow night. And good luck. Hope you guys win a lot of money tomorrow.